Hi, friends. It's your girl Harpo. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Guild titled Stop Asking Me When I'm Gonna Get Married. Now, this season at Brown Girl Guild, we're talking about teenage fever and what it was like to be a teenager and all the confusion and, anxiety and angst that you might have experienced as a teenager, and then bringing it all back into the present moment to really explore, how those feelings still might be present in our lives today. And that's because we think here at Brown Girl Guild that this not knowingness that you experience when you're a teenager isn't something that you only experience when you're young, right? It's not something that you only experience when you're 14 or 15. It can be something that you feel even at 25, 45, and maybe even 65. So, in this episode, I wanted to really explore this talk about weddings and marriage and about dating and just how annoying it has all been. And I say that because it's wedding season here at the time that I'm recording this episode in Surrey. And I have just about had it with everybody asking me when I'm going to get married, right? That's like the number one question that I have been asked all summer. I thought it was bad last year when I was 24 going on 25, but now that I'm 25 going on 26, it has gotten exponentially worse. And so I wanted to explore just why that's annoying and just why that is frustrating. So, to do that, I want to take you all back to when I was in high school. So, when I was younger, when I was in high school, I think maybe at like age 14 or 15, my dad had this talk with me and my cousin Gurjipu. You might have seen some of her on Instagram. We also just made a very viral, famous TikTok together. But he sat the both of us down and he said, guys, I would really like it if you just didn't date until after 18. I think that dating before 18 is just something that you should not do. And, at the time, like we took my dad's word very, very, like we didn't take it lightly, we took it hardly. And so when he said no dating till 18, we were like, okay, not allowed to talk to boys till we're 18, not allowed to date until we're 18. And we just were terrified. Like I want to say it was actually even earlier than 14, 15. I think it was even sooner than that. And so we, both sort of journeyed through high school. And I guess I can stop talking about her because she's not here. But I journeyed through high school and then my early 20s, like not necessarily knowing how to talk to boys because I wasn't allowed to, right? Like I was told that it was wrong, it was bad, and that I should focus on school, I should focus on myself, and that I should stay away from boys. And the reason I say that it was probably a lot sooner than 14, 15 is because I remember one time in grade 8, like, it was my birthday. It was the day of my birthday, and after I came home from school, there was one of my friends. He was crossing the sidewalk past my house and he knew it was my birthday. He hadn't seen me all day and he decided to give me a really big hug in my driveway and say, like, happy birthday. I hope you had a good day, whatever. Super harmless, very platonic, literally my birthday, right? He's giving me a hug on my birthday. And I remember like one of my aunts being there and just making the biggest deal about it. Like I was labeled horrible things throughout the entire family for that one interaction. So much so that like my parents had to have like a big family meeting to basically call out my aunt and say that it wasn't okay for her to call me the things that she was calling me, to say the things that she was saying about me, and basically insinuating that like I was, honestly, these are not my words, but use the words like slut and hoe and whore, like that I wasn't those things in general, but then especially not just because I've now hugged a boy. And so that was the extent of like not like the extent of the relationship that we were allowed to have with boys when we were growing up as girls in our family. And sometimes when I look back, I'm like, oh, like maybe it wasn't that bad, but then instances like these remind me that it actually was that bad. And so the reason, the question that I get now of like, when are you going to get married? Like, do you have a boyfriend? The reason it pisses me off so much now, and the reason it's so frustrating is that we were never set up in a way to interact with boys growing up, right? Like all of our interactions with boys were always hypersexualized. They were never, allowed to Like, we were never given any room to explore even platonic relationships with, the boys in our lives, let alone any romantic or sexual ones. And so it's like, I didn't know how to talk to a boy. I didn't know, like, what it was like to be in a safe platonic or romantic relationship with a boy. And now all of a sudden, you just expect me to know how to do all of those things. When in the past, like, you instilled so much fear into me. And so that experience became really like a fear inducing experience, right? It wasn't a positive one. It wasn't a pleasurable one. It was always such a scary one. And like it was always off limits, right? It was something that I wasn't allowed to do. And so now when I'm asked, okay, like, are you going to get married? Like, when are you going to get married? Do you have a boyfriend? The wildest actually part of all of this is like, my grandparents, so my dad and dadi will always ask me, like, do you have a friend? Like, when are you going to get married? Like, like, you should do it too while we're here. And that part to me is jarring. Like, when my grandpa, like my 80 something year old Punjabi grandpa, asks me if I have a boyfriend, it's jarring to me because that was never the dynamic that we had when I was, even like 18 or like 20. That was just not the dynamic that we had. And so now all of a sudden at this age, I'm supposed to just like, like, I don't know, just like pop on a boyfriend out of nowhere, right? And then be working my way towards marriage. It's interesting, you know, if I think about where the guilt is in all of this, I think the guilt is absolutely in now. I think, when I sort of started to explore platonic and romantic and even sexual relationships with boys, I always felt an immense guilt. There's an episode of Brown Girl Guilt titled Releasing Sexual Shame that I did with sexual embodiment coach Abneet Sundar, that you can all go back and reference and listen to. But in that episode, I really talked about how, a lot of my experiences with sexuality and pleasure and romance were filled with guilt for many years because, for so long it was entrenched into me that like, this is bad. This is not something that you should be doing. This is wrong. And so then when I did sort of like, reclaim that and be like, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. It's not like I was still enjoying any of it. Like I still felt incredibly guilty about all of it. And so even now, like, at 25, I have a more open relationship with my parents, especially my dad, where I will tell him if I'm going on a date. I will tell him if I'm talking to a boy. I very seldom hide it, but often if I'm like just hanging out with a boy and it's very, very casual and like there's no plans for it to be substantial or for, like I'm straight up say it, like if we're just hanging out and hooking up, I keep that shit a secret, like it's gonna remain a secret. Like you're just never gonna know that I'm even talking to someone. And that's because I just don't want to experience any sort of like I don't want to have that conversation because I don't really know how to have that conversation, right? And if I think about where else guilt shows up in all of this, is it shows up immensely in my dad. Like my dad feels so much guilt. It's insane. He feels like if he hadn't told us back in the day that we shouldn't date until 18, that perhaps we would have found our partners and by now, right? Especially me and my cousin Joe. He thinks that we would have found our partners if he had given us a little bit more room to actually date and explore. And I mean, while that's not completely wrong, like, I mean, yes, if he had facilitated and allowed for us to, be more open and to actually have like friendships and like platonic interactions and, potentially even romantic and sexual interactions with, other guys, perhaps we would have felt a little bit more safer in exploring and approaching the entire life of dating, right? But it's hilarious to me that my dad thinks that, if I had found a boyfriend at age 16 or 17, that I might have married him and that I might have been well on my way to getting married now, when in reality, like, that's like not everybody has a high school sweetheart, right? Like not everybody ends up with the first person that they date. And I mean, I think it's amazing. Like if that works for you, that's great. But like just to, even for him to think that like it would have been just a one and done is really funny to me. And I think the reason that he feels so guilty is because I think he feels like he's a failure. Like he truly thinks that he's failed me as a father because he, I think maybe perhaps his measure of success is different, right? And He doesn't necessarily see all the other great things that he's instilled in me and all the other wonderful things that he's taught me. And quite frankly, like all the other bad boss bitch ass energy that I am, like I'm very successful in other things in my life. And yet, because I don't have a relationship, because I'm not on my fast track path to marriage, he thinks that he's failed as a father somehow. And truly, I don't think that's true, right? And that's also the reason why I think that this entire sentiment and constantly being asked again and again, like, when are you gonna get married? Like, oh, like, when are you gonna get married? Like, when's your wedding? Da da da. The reason that it's so frustrating is because not once do people comment on or reflect on all the other successes that, women like myself have achieved. Not once do they ask about work, not once do they ask about my career, not once do they ask about, or like even celebrate and rejoice like other wins in your life, right? It's like it's as if like you don't have a man on your arm, or you're not on that checklist track of getting married. That if you don't have any of those things, like, well, there's just nothing else for them to talk about. And I made a post on Instagram recently that really prompted this episode and this discussion. And I was so happy the way that it was received, because a lot of women, a lot of people in general, like I'm not even gonna say women, but a lot of us brown kids, like we feel the pressure to get married. And women, of course, more so, because I don't know, I think we have an expiration date tattooed on our jitters. Like, who knows, right? Like it just sometimes feels like our time is running out. I feel like I'm one of those like sand watches, and like someone has turned it over and the sand's just dripping, and the entire community and my extended family is just watching the sand fall, and they're like, oh, this is the demise of Harpo. Like, so it's so wild. But the post that I made on Instagram, it did so well, and even though it's fun and it was like a funny sentiment, I basically, like, I tweeted that I'm going to start keeping track of every time an auntie tells me to get married. I want to read the caption of it, because I think the caption captures so beautifully, the intention and the why behind this conversation. And it reads: "Wedding season has been brutal. I've been asked 100 times, when are you getting married? And it's only August. A lot of the people asking are people I don't actually know at a personal level, an intimate level, and people I haven't seen in ages, and people I might not actually even invite to my wedding one day." But they love to ask this question over others, like, how are you? How's your life? How's work? Are you happy? Or even, long time no see, how's it been? And my mom apologized to me the other day. She said she felt like she was part of the problem, and that even if it were a joke, that constantly bringing up marriage with me was probably contributing to a kind of pressure she couldn't fathom. I said, yeah, duh, you think so? And I think more of our elders need to know that. Many of us enter into complacent, even unhealthy relationships without even realizing that it's just to make y'all happy and to give you a wedding to dance at, that you absolutely are part of the problem, and you're putting a lot of pressure on your kids. For all the aunties and uncles that ask me about my wedding, not once do they ask if I've found a partner, a companion, someone to build my life with and to share love with. They all ask when I'm getting married, followed with a desire to dance, sing, and wear beautiful clothes at said wedding. It's like, I kind of need a man, I kind of need a homie to marry for you to attend, right? And so, as our community consumes more and more wedding culture in real life and on social media, we have to be honest. A lot of us are looking forward to a wedding, not a marriage. And those two things are not the same thing, right? They're not synonymous. And so many of us have no idea who we are or what we want, and yet we're committing to learning that in another for a lifetime. And so many of us rush in, have massive weddings, and separate shortly after. And this is like not part of the caption, but it's it's so disheartening how many people under the age of 30 who were my contemporaries, whose weddings that I attended, like, didn't even make it to their first anniversary without being separated and divorced, right? And it's like, that's an epidemic. Like, what's happening, right? And so it's a painful process, no matter our age or the reason. And so, going back to the Instagram caption, it says, what would happen if we as a community taught ourselves and our kids the importance of self discovery and not marriage? If we showed up to the life events of our friends and cousins with the same energy as their weddings? What if we stopped making weddings the be all and end all, right? What if we stopped doing that? Now, this is not part of the Instagram caption, but I want to go back to that part about my mom for a second. My mom and I sat down and we had a conversation about all of this. And she said to me, like, she felt really bad, and felt like her constant asking and everybody else's constant asking was sort of pushing me to date men who might not necessarily be within my league, like might not be people that I actually feel happy, safe, and protected with. Might not be guys that actually, I see myself with, but I'm just sort of hanging out with and taking crumbs from, because that's what feels like the easiest way to, and the most like straight up, like I'm just dating all these guys, and then I end up getting hurt, and it's all because there's so much pressure just to find the right one. And I said that, true, there is an element of that. Like, I mean, of course, like I'm not the kind of person that's ever going to settle. I've never settled for anything in my life, and I'm not the kind of person that's going to settle for the one of the biggest decisions of my life, which is who I'm going to spend a large portion of that life with. But there is an element of that, right? Like, so many of us put ourselves out there and we give it a go. And even though perhaps we might be really craving solitude and craving some time to ourselves, and to just take, X amount of years for ourselves, we might be, hopping onto dating apps. We might be going on all these dates. We might be talking to all these people, going out, and spending copious amounts of money at the bar and clubs every weekend, because we think that's what's going to bring that person to us. And, I want to preface all of this by saying that wanting to be in a relationship, wanting marriage, wanting partnership, companionship, none of that is bad. Like, none of that is, like, it's actually a beautiful thing to want a relationship. We experience so much healing and love and care in relationships, and it's not wrong to want that. But the reasons for why we want to enter into those relationships, and for the reason why we want to have a marriage and have a wedding, are so important, right? And if we're just doing it to tick off a box on a checklist, or make the family members in our lives happy, or for us to like give ourselves a pat on the back and be like, look, I've accomplished something, right? I set out a goal that I wanted to get married at 28, and I did it. If we're just doing it to show up and show off for people, I don't think that's the best decision. I don't think it's the best reason for you to actually get into these relationships, right? And so it was actually a really big moment for me to have my mom say that to me, and to recognize the pressure that she's putting on me. And, I think everybody else in my family and in the community might not necessarily ever have that understanding or awareness. And we might not ever have that conversation. And they might not ever apologize for that. But I think my mom recognizing that was a really big part of the entire equation, right? And so I want to end off this episode by saying that, there's going to be people who are always going to ask us questions about our lives, right? It might be a boyfriend today, boyfriend partner, it might be partner today. It might be marriage tomorrow. And then the day after that, it might be children. And then after that, it might be the second or third child that you have. Lokante na questioning mo ko na, okay? People asking us questions, people being curious and inquisitive about our lives, being nosy, is never, ever going to end. It's going to go on forever and forever, right? And so the only thing that we can change is our reaction. The only thing that we can change is the way that we receive it and the way that we perceive it. And so what I do now is, like, there's a few things that I do. I just don't even bring up anything about my life with these people. I keep the focus solely on them. I ask them questions about them, or I make small talk, and I leave as soon as I can, right? Like, for example, I ran into this auntie at the mall. I hadn't seen her in so long, because last time I saw her was probably before the pandemic. First thing she asked me was when I was going to get married. I changed the topic immediately, and I started to talk to her about the weather, straight up. Like, that's it. And I immediately ended the conversation, and I scurried on out of there as fast as I could. So that's a boundary that I've set for myself. And the second thing is, like, not getting worked up, like, straight up. Like, I used to get really worked up when people asked me that, and I would feel my blood pressure rise, and I would feel like my heartbeat increase. And then I would be like left in this like weird anxious limbo for the rest of the day. And it was all because this one person asked me this question. Like, she asked it and she left, right? She has nothing else to say to me now. But she probably had no idea that she impacted me in that way. And so controlling the way that I react, like not giving in, not getting worked up, all that really helps. And lastly, I think, like, it's well within your reason to stop seeing people who make you feel this way. I have a cousin who just doesn't come around anymore because she was sick and tired of having people in our family ask her again and again when she was going to get married. And she got sick and tired of her worth being measured with when she was going to get married, whether she had a man on her arm or not. She just got sick of it. And so she stopped coming around, and then it was the family's responsibility to realize and to recognize why that had happened, and to hold themselves accountable for it. And so It's well within your right to just not interact with people who do not make you feel safe, who do not make you feel loved, who cared for, and don't make you feel like, that like your existence is has to be palatable for them. That they have to be able to understand your choices. You don't have to hang out with any of them. And so I want to echo again the question that I, ended my Instagram caption with, and say that what would happen if we as a community taught ourselves and our kids the importance of self-discovery and not marriage, right? The self-discovery, like how can we, in light of all of these things, right? Like in light of setting those boundaries, controlling how you respond, perhaps not even, seeing any of these people that make you feel shitty. I guess the biggest thing that we can do is commit ourselves to our self discovery, right? And to really, really anchor deep into it. So I want to leave us all with that question. How can you get curious about your own self discovery as you navigate your beautiful, immense, deep journey?